Hello, everyone. My name is Glenn Osley. I'm president. No, I won't say it. I'm president of Promess Incorporated. We're here today to talk about. This is our part of our Ask the Expert series. Things that you should consider when buying press fit equipment, assembly equipment. First, I want to tell you a little bit about Promess. Looks like we have a good crowd out there. That's good. So I figure that maybe some of you guys, I assume if you're here, you know about Promess, but just in case. Promess has been around since 1984. We were founded in 1984. We are a Brighton, Michigan company. Our main headquarters and manufacturing facility is in Brighton, Michigan. We have facilities or service and support in 28 different countries around the world. We have California, Texas, Alabama, and North Carolina facilities. So we really are truly a global company, but we were founded here in Brighton, Michigan, and it is still our headquarters. We started out as a sensing company, so we're very, very strong in sensing, primarily force and torque. It's really what we do really, really well. We've evolved really early on. We were founded in '84, and by '88, we were doing a lot of motion control stuff. People wanted to use our sensing information in order to control their processes. And sometimes they try to hook it up to hydraulic cylinders and pneumatic cylinders and so on with very, very limited success. So at the time, we developed a servo-controlled ball screw press. So we've been doing this since the late 80s, early 90s. And really what we specialize in now and what we've evolved into is an assembly company that we really specialize in force and torque, press fits, different types of pressing operations. But what sets us apart as far as at least our processes is the ability to add sensing into your operation to sense what's happening in real time, make real-time adjustments, real-time adaptations to the process, and make a very good part every time. And then once it's done, using that process or that information to pass or fail the product with in process monitoring, and catching the fault right at the station.
Right.
So today we're hoping, we want to answer your questions, and we really hope that this will be something that is of value to you. That's we're hoping that this is valuable for you. So please ask any questions you have. Again, my name is Glenn Osley, president of Promess, but I spent 25 years in application engineering, been with Promess 34 years now. In fact, my anniversary was just like August 2nd, a few weeks ago. So,
I'm impressed you know your anniversary.
yeah, I know, it's amazing. John Lytle's been with us over 20 years. He heads up our application engineering department, and really is involved in a lot of our business level stuff also. Stephanie Price has had a different route at Promess. She was involved in software, so she has a different background, but for the last 5 or 6 years has been working in application engineering, taking on some of our more difficult projects and doing a lot of the project management type stuff. So there's a lot of application engineering knowledge at this table. We were joking around earlier saying we had 100 years, but not really, not quite 100 years of,
Getting there though.
but it's getting close. Yeah. So with that, just to kick it off, figured I would ask Mr. Lytle here a question, and so, just to get us started is, what do you see as if somebody's buying a new piece of equipment, what do you see as the most important thing to consider?
Well, keeping in mind that the theme here is that things to consider before buying press fit equipment. One of the things I guess pretty standard answer is picking the right tool for the right job. And what does that really mean from our standpoint? From our standpoint, what it means is that you get the right solution for your particular application. And there's a lot of different things to consider from that aspect. And some of the more basic ones is the equipment appropriately sized? So in press fit applications, you're looking for, how much force is it going to take to press that assembly together? Can it position accurately and things like that? So that's probably the primary thing is picking the right tool for the right job. Force, like I mentioned, take a basic application like just pressing a seal or a bearing into a housing. It seems pretty simple, but I've seen many times where they've picked the wrong equipment for that, whether it be not enough power or force to actually put the assembly together, or if it's something a little more involved, like you're not able to easily get the data out and things like that to tell you that your assembly's been pressed together well or correctly. So things like that. So what Promess here has to offer on that, and Glenn talked about this earlier, is all of our application experience. So we have a group of 12 application engineers that are waiting to take calls and discuss your application, and that's a big part of what we do here. And
But if I could interject,
Sure.
it's actually way more than just take calls, because we actually partner with our customers.
Correct.
Like, we'll take your call initially, but we have a whole process development center, and the applications that I've been on that are the most successful are the ones that we've worked with them right from the beginning. They've brought their parts in, or if they've sent their parts in, and we can actually take them and the tooling and put them on one of our workstations here and actually go through the process, because a lot of times people will say they need a certain size press, but they're just doing an assumption. They have no data or any.
right. If they're using the technology, or if they're taking from older technology, hydraulics and pneumatics, generally those were sized for just for max output. So they really don't give you any feedback as far as how much force it actually takes. So we run into this all the time, that there's a big giant hydraulic cylinder that's putting out, 50,000 pounds of force to press in this seal, a little bit of an exaggeration. But it only really takes 4,500 pounds to do that, and that's what Stephanie's talking about as far as the PDC, our Product Development Center. And we can take you through that whole process and actually give you a whole data package back of all that information, so that it does multiple things for you. You learn about your process, you learn about your parts, and it tells you how successful you're going to be with using a particular product, at least from our standpoint. So it reduces the risk.
Well, other times too, you learn that there are additional sensors that you need. So you might not have thought that you were going to need a probe to measure, but once you start getting in there, you realize, oh, we need a probe. There's additional things that we need to take into our system.
Yeah, there's two things as you two were talking, I thought about. One is, as far as the sizing, I've seen it both ways. I've seen where people undersize the press, and it's a major issue later on. And if they undersize the press, having to totally change out hardware later, it's not just the press or the servo drive, but the C-frame, it's everything. So you got to make sure you size it right to start with. But I've seen people oversize it too, because they've been making this part with a hydraulic cylinder, and their hydraulic cylinder will do 10,000 pounds, and their tooling is designed to bottom out. So every time they're coming down with 10,000 pounds and bottoming out. But the work is really being done with 2,500 pounds.
Right.
So they go and they buy a 10,000 pound electric cylinder that they really could have got away with maybe a 4,000 pound cylinder. So I've seen both.
Right.
And Stephanie touched on the probes. One of the things that Promess's application engineers can do really, really well, and what we really offer, is our expertise in the sensing side and customer and understanding how to use the sensing to improve your process. Many times we have customers come to us with a prototype part, a set of drawings, and sit with our application engineers, and basically say, how should I make this part? This is the way we used to do it, but we want to do it better. We have these problems. How can we make this part? Our application guys, one thing where I think that we differ quite a bit from other companies that do similar things is that you can have a technician that really knows your product really well. We could have a technician at Promess that knows our press systems really well, knows our motors, knows our drives, knows our mechanics, and can tell you all about it. And there's value there. But what our application engineers bring is we understand assembly processes. We understand how to put parts together. We have many years of process knowledge, and we can really help you with that.
For sure. When I first started off working for Promess, I figured I'd learn the product, that type of thing. What I've really learned about is everybody's applications out there. I think I know more about a steering gear than a lot of the engineers that deal with
A lot of the
steering
guys
gears. Just from that, working with our equipment that's doing a lot of the testing and things like that, and the assembly of that type of stuff. So,
So I think
it's kind of
it
an interesting.
It is without a doubt one of the high value adds that I think Promess offers. And when you talk about what should you take into consideration before buying assembly equipment, I'm kind of getting ahead of ourselves here because we want to take questions from you guys, but I like talking about this stuff, is the one of the things to really consider is you're partnering with a real partner that's not just the technology expert on their product, but also understands your industry and your products, because the technology is getting so specialized that no one person can be expert in all the technologies. You can't have, and so the poor integrator or builder now, in the old days, they were expert in everything. But now, it's impossible to be expert in the vision and leak testing and welding and assembly and all these processes. So you have to partner with the resources that have this
Well, the
depth.
experts that have all that knowledge.
Yeah.
And that's what we're good at.
And so, advertisement for Promess, that is our strength.
Right, so now I'm gonna ask you a question. What's your answer to that same question you asked me?
Well, we talked about some of the technical aspects, and over the years, if I look at one of the most important things to consider, I'm not sure if this is a thing to consider or just a trend I've seen in the industry. And this trend seems to waver, for a period of time. The guys at the plant floor level, the plants, are buying equipment and have a lot of power. And then that buying responsibility gets transferred to a corporate entity, let's say. And that corporate entity is doing the buying. And I can tell you right now, we're kind of in that phase. And I've seen it float back to the plants, and float back up to the
Well,
corporate
do you think
entity.
that influx is basically part of the economy, and how, when companies are pulling money back, and we're in a situation now where we're seeing some of that, in reverse of that, or in opposite of that, you see companies that have a lot of money and are willing to spend it. You kind of see that trend play into what you're going to talk about?
I think that's part of it. I definitely think it's part of it. And I think part of it is that the technologies are more specialized, so the companies think they need to have these more specialized people. And I think a mix is good. But the trend that I've seen is if the guys at the plant, the guys who have to live with the equipment, are the guys who are responsible and have a part in the purchasing, they have a long-term view, because they have to live with this equipment over a long period of time. If it's purchased from an outside entity that doesn't have to live with it long-term, they have a different motivation. Their motivation is short-term. Their motivation is getting the equipment in, getting the equipment run off, buying it at the lowest price they can buy it. Their motivation isn't to make sure 10 years later this stuff is still producing good parts, or for the life of the project.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you not only lose that motivation, and you're not only working in the wrong motivation, but if the guys at the plant level aren't part of the buying experience, they don't buy into it.
No, not at all. In fact, they get frustrated, and it's almost
Yeah.
like they no longer want to work on the project because they were handed something and now they have to make it work.
Special equipment is always going to have some glitches you have to work through, and they're much more motivated to work through those glitches if they're involved in the process. It's their machine that they need
To
to.
have that ownership.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really important whenever you're working on any type of project. If you need that ownership in order to make it work.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's really one of the things you should consider, but it is one of the things that I've seen in the industry is that who is responsible for buying the equipment is very, very important, and there are definitely negatives the further detached you get from the people that have to use it.
Yeah, exactly. Good point.
Questions from the audience?
Yep. What do we have for questions?
What's a typical payback period for a servo press?
Well,
Everybody look
Everyone's
at
stopping us now.
Yeah,
there's several different things, right, to look at when you're looking at the payback period of a servo press. So you can look at it just at the return on your current investment. When you're working with a servo press, initially have an upfront cost, but then most of the expense is upfront. You're not going to deal with electricity costs. They're going to be lower than if you're using a hydraulic press.
Maintenance costs
Maintenance are
is
lower.
much lower.
so your short term versus your short term leading into your kind of midterm costs are going to definitely be less.
Right. The,
So
yeah, the biggest cost savings is in part quality. Bad quality costs money. So the biggest cost savings is in part quality. Early on, an electromechanical press, fully programmable, it generally runs off, and the setup's much quicker. One of the things that's one of our missions is when we're developing our products is that you shouldn't have to be a controls engineer to set up a Promess press. Apologies to any controls engineers out there, but you guys are in short supply, and if you shouldn't need to be a controls engineer. There's a PLC interface that has to be set up, but after that, it's really designed for the process guy, the mechanical guy, to be able to set up.
Yep.
So the setup is quicker, the runoff is quicker, getting it off the builder's floor is quicker. Once it's off the builder's floor, you have the savings in definitely less downtime, better part quality. You have those kind of
Yeah.
savings.
That's exactly what I just wrote
Yep.
down is downtime. You don't see the same amount of downtime.
Yeah, and how much
yeah,
does
but the quicker you
downtime
get
cost you?
the machine into production is really where you get your upfront cost
Yeah,
savings on that.
it's
So
the-
it's got to be making money for you.
Minimization of risk.
Yep, exactly.
Like saying aluminum.
Tough to say.
At least for me. But yeah, and then you have there's a lot of ancillary things, like it is
Yeah, it's a lot of
much lower energy cost. An electromechanical press, I don't have the number off the top of my head, but I believe it's something like 28% of the
Well, it's
energy
it's
of
only
a hydraulic
utilizing
press.
energy when it's
When it's running,
operating.
yeah.
So when it's sitting still not doing anything, there's no energy.
A
being
hydraulic
used, so-
system, if you ever felt how hot the hydraulic fluid gets, that is all lost energy. That doesn't heat up,
Right.
except it's lost energy.
Another thing to consider too is if this servo press system is replacing a current process, and how well is your current process to begin with. If you are making parts and you're scrapping, 10% of your parts, that's a lot of money that you're scrapping. Like
Right.
you put that servo press in, they're making.
That's where the payback is a difficult one. We usually shoot for less than a year payback,
Yeah.
but sometimes it's much quicker. We did a job on control arms one time where they literally were reworking 30% of their parts,
Yep.
and this is a
can't
this is a
imagine.
blast from the past because this was a while ago. But I remember actually Promess has a phrase where we say we're cloning parts because we make the same part over and over and over again, and that actually came from this job I'm talking about. And the engineer who was in charge of it was interviewed by Assembly Magazine, and he said it's like we're cloning parts, and it was because they had that 30% rework, and he said they'd run 2 months, and this was when the machine was brand new. He said they'd run 2 months without making one bad part,
Yep.
and so what is the payback there?
Yeah.
Within a few weeks.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
So
still hard answer to
yeah,
or hard
it's
question to answer.
intangible. Yeah, a lot of intangibles. What does the buying process look like buying from Promess?
Well, we talked a little bit about
Mhm.
this, but the buying process is really a partnership. So it's not like a catalog type. You select a catalog item and then you go and order it through Promess purchasing. It's a partnership. So when you call Promess looking for a particular press, for instance, or something like that, one of our systems or solutions, our admin group who fields these calls initially is going to direct you to the application group. So then myself, Stephanie, or one of the other members of our team are going to then talk to you about your application. And we're going to ask you a lot of different things about your application, things you might not even know. But we're going to start off with that process, and then probably what's going to happen at that point is we're going to direct you to our PDC like we talked
Yeah.
about, where we're going to make sure that what you're getting is the right solution for your particular application.
And we've had customers who've brought parts in, tested them, taken them back, analyzed the data, come back with more parts. It's not a one-time thing. We go through the whole process with you, and then we don't leave you once you've purchased. And I think that is so important because I hear out in the field a lot of times how difficult it is to get people in for service or support or just setup.
Well, and
Right.
again, it's what we said earlier is we know the process. We're involved in the process.
Yeah.
So if the press breaks, of course we're there if you have a problem. But 95% of our service is helping
Understand the entire process.
helping with the process.
Yeah.
What would you say is if you looked at our buying process and who we're dealing with and stuff, what would you say is the number one most important thing I know instantly what I would say, but what would you say? I'm going to put you on the spot.
Most important part of the process is the partnership.
Yeah.
I mean, because you have someone I'm going to take ownership of that process with whoever I'm working with
Spoken
to the
like
same
a true
level.
project manager.
Well, but
See, I agree with you 100%, but it's the service and support that we give on our products is really what everybody's after, and that's in my opinion.
And I guess to me, we're
That's
just calling it something
part
different.
of a partnership,
right?
but see, and you guys went a little different than me, which I agree with both of you, but I was thinking the PDC. The fact that we can take your parts in and before you ever even buy a Promess press and prove out the process.
Yeah.
So I think all three fit, but my mind went to PDC.
Yeah, definitely, because if you don't know all that information ahead of time, then you don't necessarily, like John said before, make the right tool for the right job or have the right sensors in place, like we mentioned before. You need information in order to be able to be successful.
Okay. Do we have another question from the audience? What happens if my product changes?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, it really comes down to the system that you purchase, whether you have the right tool for the right job again. I keep coming back to that, but it's really about how flexible the system or solution is that you actually purchase. So what I mean by that is in 4 or 5 years, your product changes, engineering changes, and things like that happen. How do you handle that? Well, with a servo press or with a programmable press system, it's actually really simple.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times in the past, customers would have to either dig through their own PLC language or have a controls engineer do it for them. With us, we really try hard to make our software intuitive so that the user just has to go in and simply
Right.
make
An
a
example
change or
of
two.
that is a new part model comes in through the line. There's different forces, different positional requirements, things like that. I can have an application engineer go out, and usually within a couple hours, he can make an entirely new program for that particular application and be on their way running production.
Right.
So that goes into a lot of other things we've already talked about. Like,
Yeah, 'cause you're not down. You can start that
Right.
fairly quickly.
Why is a servo system more expensive than hydraulic?
well,
Is it though? I mean, initially, right, you have more expense up front if you were just to take one quote A and quote B. But I think we've talked a few of the intangibles already in regards to hydraulic and servo systems.
It's more of a short-term versus long-term thing, and like Stephanie said, there's a lot of intangibles there that we're partnering with you. You have the control, you have the accuracy. A lot more technology is into a servo system versus a hydraulic system.
Much lower maintenance costs, much lower.
The things we've been talking
Much
about.
lower energy costs, and this is one, to get, I don't want to go too far into the weeds, and for the person who asked this question, for anytime, call Promess and we can really dive into these face to face or over the phone and kind of really explain in
Or
detail.
Zoom or Teams nowadays.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. When it comes to your application, we're happy to talk to you about it over the phone, because part of this depends on if this is a smaller press. Actually, by the time you have a hydraulic unit, if you don't already have the hydraulic pumps and the filters and all the tubing and everything else, even the upfront cost of a smaller press is lower,
Yeah,
in
for
my
sure.
belief. The implementation is lower. Where hydraulics really, where they really shine and where their strength is at is in high force level applications. If you have a 50,000 pound, 100,000 pound application, a electric press system is going to be double the cost. I mean, it really is. It's going to be double the initial cost.
Yep.
Now, that's where why we have customers come to us and want to go electric, and we'll say, why? why are you changing from hydraulic? And they're usually saying, because I'm making bad parts, we're not getting the quality we need more control.
Yep.
These are high maintenance items, and we keep going down, and it's dirty. There's oil all over the place, and we have a problem because we're working in a clean room environment, and that's where all these intangibles come in. We sell a lot. Promess, a lot of our turnover is in high force level press systems. And if the only consideration was upfront cost, we wouldn't. It really is, because there's more of these long-term considerations and the cleanliness and energy and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But
That's
at the low level, even the initial cost is
it's
comparable.
pretty close. Yeah,
Yep.
it is until you get in the higher forces. Exactly right. Yep.
We have another question.
How long does your equipment last?
It lasts forever.
Longer than you need it to last.
right.
If
That's-
it's sitting on the shelf not doing anything, it'll last
Right,
a
if you don't run it
1,000
at all.
years. And so that's one of these trick questions, or one of these questions that, how long does it last? Depends very much on what it's doing.
Yeah. So how are you utilizing it?
Yeah.
So I can tell from our systems, our ball screw presses, they're sized larger. They have a 2.5 time mechanical factor built into them because they're designed to be used in production.
Which is the
And
highest in the industry.
Yeah. So a typical press that's a 1,000-pound press can do 2.5 times more than that theoretically, but we limit it to the 1,000 pounds, and we do that so that it can run flawlessly for years and years and years. There's a little more to it.
Right, so the electronics part, we size it so that we're running in a continuous current, not in a peak current.
So duty cycle on the control components of that, the electrical components, aren't generating a lot of heat, so they last longer. A typical calculation we do on a system, let's just say we're running 6 days a week, 3 shifts, so basically running 6 days all the time with limited amounts of downtime in it. And we're running at 80% of its load for a couple millimeters, let's say, of that press fit. It's going to last well over 20 years, but getting into a little more of the technical aspect of it.
Yeah. Well, I can take I hesitate to tell this story because it might be a little bit too much in the weeds, but I'll make it really fast. Is we actually did an application early on. This was a number of years ago, and we're doing valve seat and valve guide stuff, and we've done a lot of valve seat and valve guide work, and we're pressing valve seats into an engine head, and we did the calculation, and it was part of kind of a comparative to a homemade system that a guy had built, and the problem he was having was an integrator had built their own press system, and it was failing a lot. So our customer came to us and said, we really like your capability, but we've tried ball screw presses on this application, and they just don't hold up. And we're telling them they didn't hold up because the design was poor. It wasn't that the ball screw as a technology won't hold up, because this gentleman wanted to buy our monitoring system and put it on a hydraulic station. And what we did is we went through a calculation, and this particular calculation, pressing a valve seat every 3.5 seconds, and I think it was 6 days, 7-hour shifts, 3 shifts type of thing, and did the calculation, but we did it with a ball screw that this application took 3,000 pounds. We did it with a 3,000-pound ball screw, and it had a 6-month life doing it at that rate.
Yeah.
But Promess uses a 2.5 factor, and on this particular press, we actually went to, I think it was more like a 3.3 factor on this particular press size, and we use the ball screw we use with the calculation, and it had a 22-year life. So it went from 6 months to 22 years just based on how stuff is sized. And that's how we size our equipment.
But all that goes back to partnering with you and you understanding all this stuff up front and us understanding it as well, because then we can select the right tool for the right job on that. So what kills the ball screw is really that load over its entire stroke.
Right.
And that's why you see in the industry with other systems, I can't tell you how many times we've come in and replaced competitors' presses because of that.
You go in their specs, and I hate this. If you go to Promess's website, you go to Promess's website, and you won't see anything where it says we'll last 1 million cycles or last 5 million cycles or whatever. Other people will put we last 1 million cycles, but 1 million cycles doing what? What wears out a ball screw and bearing package is stroke under load. I can take one of Promess presses and run it up and down full stroke with no load on it, and it'll probably last 300 million cycles. But I can tell you, you run full stroke under full load, it won't approach that. That's what wears it out. But in most applications, you're pressing a smaller distance
Right.
under load.
Yeah, especially in
and,
press fit, right?
And our units are built where you don't have to worry about that too much because they are built very, very robust. But we still can do that calculation and tell people with their particular application how long it will last.
Exactly. Next question, can the press tell me when my part is bad? How? So,
I think that's data related or monitoring related.
for sure, so Glenn talked about really at the very beginning of this, how all of our products, whether it's presses, torque units, remaps, things like that, we have built-in sensing for all of our products, and all that sensing gets fed back into our controller where we can analyze that data. So that's really how we do it. We give the whole process a sense of touch or feel. Like when you grab this cup, I know I grabbed that cup and I know how much force I'm putting in it. We do that. We try to put that same analogy into our technology to be able to tell you whether or not you have something different or whether it's been pressed to an acceptable amount or not.
Well, we can also take the data and I'm gonna go back to software, right?
That's
I mean,
it.
like that's where I started, and that's where I have a passion, to an extent. And one of the things that I think is really exciting that we can do is we can take in the data, right? You can see your reference curve, and then you can come up with a strategy based off of your ideal part, and you can decide where you need to be more finite in your tolerances.
Right. Well, and if you collect that data and you have a failure, and you can look at the data and recognize what that failure looks like, you can set up parameters to catch that failure in the future.
Right, and another time it might actually be a failure because of the process. So
Mhm.
then you can easily go back into the system and tweak the process how it needs to be
So
tweaked.
you're really just picking out what's different and then putting parameters around that.
Yeah.
So
And,
that, go ahead.
well, it's in the old days. I've been around a long time, and when we were selling monitoring systems and stuff, kind of the demonstration I used to like because I think it's very visual. And if I have a family member ask me, what does Promess do, I usually explain it with kind of the arbor press understanding. You have the craftsman who's building these things by hand with an arbor press, and you think about if you've ever used an arbor press, you can feel whether you're making a good part or not. So I'm pushing the bearing into the housing, and if the bearing's cocked or something's not going in right, you feel it.
Well, you put more
Mhm.
effort.
Yeah,
into it.
right.
Right.
You know, especially if you do a lot of them, you
Yeah.
know what feels good, what doesn't. But if I have an automated system, or even I put the part in, I hit the buttons for the hydraulics to come down, or the electric to come down, or the air to go down, whatever my actuator is, what Promess specializes in is putting sensing into the process, and all of our electromechanical presses have that sensing built in. We're basically replacing the craftsman in his feel.
Mhm.
And that is the very basic level of it. And that's what we've been doing for 34 years, but 36 years. And my math isn't so good anymore.
Well, it's because of your age, right?
Exactly. I think that's definitely part of it. You have no idea yet. but
I'm getting there.
but we've over the years we've taken that strategy and really refined it to be able to do much more high level stuff. That was the
Oh, for
beginnings
sure.
of it.
Yeah.
Started off basic press fit, and now we're involved in multi-axis,
Yeah.
some levels of gauging, all kinds of different things.
Yeah. Does Promess build any poke yoke system to confirm if full insertion of a component is done?
Well, this goes back to what we were just talking about. Any Promess system's gonna have that sensing built in, so depending on how you develop or create your program is gonna determine whether that's a pass or fail. So it can be really, really simple. In fact, 60–70% of our applications are really, really simple. So like, we keep analogizing with bearing pressing. It's pretty basic, right? You press a bearing into a housing, it generally will shoulder on something. Very simple type of thing. So I can make a program with the servo system or electric press very easy and just have it tell you that it actually fully seated simply by generating a graph that shows that bottom out force. And then it's go or no go at that point. Did it reach that full depth
Force.
or
Right.
not? And basically, I don't know if I've answered your question, but basically that's how we would handle something like that.
Right, and it
So
could be,
it can be anything from really, really simple to a lot more extravagant. So what typically happens as we partner with you guys is you start off very simple with wanting just the basic bottom out force, and then it gets a little more elaborative once you start understanding and seeing some of the differences in the other processes that affect that actual press fit.
It's also not uncommon to, like, when you're at the beginning stages of partnering, for someone to say, oh, I'm only going to need force over position. That's the only data I'm gonna know. That's what I want. And then as they get into it and they realize, oh wait, I can get the max force at this particular position, and I can, once they realize that there's all sorts of different combinations of data that they can get,
Yeah.
then they realize.
And how many times does that upset their product engineers once they start seeing the process
Right.
and the visual that's given from
Yeah.
systems like that?
Yeah.
what happens if my part, I want to know that it's gone to full depth, but maybe where I press to doesn't, just because the press is positioned to the right spot, my part's not at the right spot. How would you solve a problem like that?
Well, then you get into a little more advanced type analysis on that, and control is, at least
Can I-
with the Promess system, we can basically look at rate differences and changes like that to detect where that needs
Can I add another sensor in to
Or you
measure
could add a
sensor.
a different datum
Yeah.
on the part, or?
Yep. So exactly, yep.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
You stole my thunder.
Well, that's where I wanted them to go.
Right.
No, well, one of the things is we do a lot of applications where you're pressing a bearing in, or you're pressing a bushing in. This is really
bushing's a
common.
good
Yeah.
example for
This is
that.
really common with like resilient bushings, because the tolerance on the bushing isn't real high, and you're normally pressing on the can of the bushing, but there's an inner pin, and the location of the inner pin is what's important. So you put a probe or a mechanism to measure where the inner pin is at, and that closed loops with the control, and we can press that bushing until the gauge. You basically make your fixture into a gauge, and the gauge feeds back to the press system, and the press system will press the part and make a good part every time. We call it make and gauge, gauge and make. We're making a
Right.
good part every single time.
And it can change from part to part, so that because you have that datum that you're looking at that's different, your press program is not going to buy identical. Part A,
Really,
the
you're
bushing
compensating
maybe.
for manufacturing
Yes.
differences in the product and still making a good part with potentially bad parts.
And
Right.
you talk about like cost savings and things like that. I've worked on many projects where customers were trying to make their piece parts more and more and more perfect to improve their assemblies. And nobody cares about this bushing. Nobody cares where the pin is at in relation to the can. All they care about is when it's in the control arm, where the pin is at in relation to the ball joint on the control arm. So I don't need to spend a ton of money buying perfect bushings
Right.
if I have a system that will basically calibrate every single part to put that pin at exactly the right spot in relation
Trying-
to the ball joint.
Trying to make all those components precise like
It's
that.
very
what does it do?
expensive.
It just adds cost.
It adds a lot
Right.
of cost.
And that goes back to the payback, right? So if you don't need to have precise amount of pieces, that
Yep.
you're assembling, then you're going to have payback much sooner.
I worked on a job where doing pressure relief valves, where they were in exactly that problem, and they were this pressure relief valve. They would test it, they'd assemble it. It would come over with a small dial machine, like a 48, or no, not even that. I think it was about a 40-inch dial machine. It would swing around. They'd do the test. They'd pump fluid through it, oil through it at a set flow, and measure what pressure it opened up at. And they had a window that they had to meet as far as the opening up pressure. And in order to meet that, they started buying more and more precise springs. And what we did is we engineered a system with them where we would pump the fluid through as we were pressing it, and we had a pressure gauge on there, and we would press the seat until the pressure was at the proper amount. We were making parts amazingly repeatable over and over and over again, and they cut like 30 something cents out of every single spring because they could start
Wow.
buying cheaper springs.
I'm gonna change the subject. So, how long ago was that?
That was maybe 20 years ago.
So,
and we've done
about
that.
3 years ago,
Yeah.
that machine was still running.
Yeah,
And I know what one you're talking about.
yeah. That was actually one of my best service trips ever because I thought I was a little worried about it. It was the first time we had done that, and I drove to Burlington, Ontario, I think, and we ran that off. I got there in the morning. We ran it off by noon, and don't ask me why I remember this, but we went and had fish and chips for lunch, and I drove home. It was fantastic.
Next question. What kind of support do you have for your systems? So,
Well,
Stephanie lives that support every day as well as I do,
Yeah.
so she could probably speak
in
more.
fact, I am currently, as we sincerely call it, on the pager, right? So that means you can get a hold of a Promess engineer.
You can tell we've been doing that a long time. We still call it a pager.
Yeah, it's a pager. Real quick little story. Yeah, it started off as a little pager you'd carry on there and it'd beep and all that type of thing. Well, now it's still call it that, but it's a
Yeah,
cell
I
phone
mean-
now.
Yeah, it's actually that the
It's an
calls get
automated
forwarded
system.
to your cell phone.
Yep,
So Steffi's on call 24
Yes.
hours a day right now.
right now.
Yeah,
Yep.
she's actually the one.
Did
So,
not
like
know
I had
that.
mentioned earlier, we have a group
Yeah.
of 12 application engineers, and we rotate through this being on call for a week. You know, we each take it a week, and what that really means is that we're available to field any calls you have or problems or anything like that. You can call into the number, and within about 15 or 20 minutes, any time of the day, you're going to get a hold of somebody and talk to a real person that's actually capable of helping solve your problems.
Right.
So that's something that's a big deal with Promess, and we take a lot of pride in that. And you can ask our spouses about how interrupted they are with their night's sleep and
When we-
traveling off in the middle of
Yeah.
the night to places
I
and
think-
things like that. So
I think the funniest call that I've ever gotten when I've had the pager was someone called in. They were having a problem with a press, and I asked them for the job number, and it just nothing was ringing a bell. And they then mentioned our competitor, and I said no.
they,
Go ahead.
yeah, they actually called in and they had a competitor's press and were asking us for help on their system.
I haven't had to carry the pager in about 10 years now, so this again is an old story, but I remember I was out walking the driveway at like 1 in the morning because my cell phone didn't work well in my house. So I'm outside walking circles in the driveway, and this was a customer who was only about 2 hours from us, and he started the call by saying, "I know this isn't a Promess problem, but you know this application better than anybody here." And I walked him through, solved the problem that it was like 1 in the morning, and got his machine back up and running, and it wasn't a Promess problem. It was a sensor on the machine that had gone bad,
Yeah,
but
that's-
we had engineered and been involved partnering with them for the solution. So we're talking about our after-hours support and stuff, and the other thing I wanted to add on this is the support is, we mentioned Promess is a Brighton, Michigan company. Our strongest support is in Brighton, Michigan. It's just where, it's where our base is at. We have 12 to 14 people here that are, top level application engineers. But we do have people in North Carolina and Alabama and Texas and California. We have 28 different countries around the world.
Yeah.
Some of those countries we have like 1 or 2 guys technical support. But we have very strong support in Shanghai, in Berlin, in Mexico, in Brazil, Canada, up in Ontario.
Yeah.
So we really are a global company with support. I mean, I think if we really counted our support, we probably have 100 people.
Oh yeah, for sure, easy.
Yeah, I would think
Yep.
so too.
Oh.
Next question: what are the range of press sizes available?
Well, that's pretty easy question actually. We have lots of different press sizes available. We range down to the grams, measuring. Back up a little bit. Our press sizes are generally sized based off how much force they can put out. So down to less than a pound to grams, all the way up to a couple 100,000 pounds,
Yeah,
or even higher in some instances.
The biggest press we've ever made is a 1 meganewton, which is 212,000 pounds, 220,000 pounds, and we have the capability to go over 400,000 pounds. We've drawn it but never built it.
Yeah.
So
So quite a few different press sizes available.
Yeah. One of the things too is that on the low end, I worked on a project years ago with a very, I'm using my fingers, but it's like smaller than a dime, this little poppet valve.
Yeah.
And we were just testing a poppet valve, and it was 0.3 grams to open this poppet valve. And so the lightest process I ever remember doing was 0.3 grams. And the heaviest process was one where we were compacting some powder.
Yeah, that was the
And-
application I got to work on. That
Yep,
was, that was a lot
Stephanie
of fun.
headed that up, and yeah, that was a couple 100,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And that was actually one of our most in-depth projects, and Stephanie's project management skills made it go pretty
Yeah,
well.
they did, for sure, because there's a lot of different
Yeah.
things to that
Oh.
project. I'd like to note too that we also have press multi-axis systems also. Our remap, for instance, is a linear press that gives you force and position feedback like our traditional press does, but it also has a rotating element to it where you can control torque and angle with it as well and measure that torque. So I know we have various sizes in that as well, so just throw that out there.
What's a typical lead time on replacement parts? I would break that up into standard and special, because.
Right, so I just mentioned that we have all these different press sizes. Most of let's say we engineer a new press size, that generally becomes a standard. So we have lots of different press sizes that are standard press sizes, and if it is one of those standard press sizes, then generally we can have,
Normally we have it on the shelf.
it's on the
Right.
shelf,
Yeah.
so it's just a matter of,
Yeah, what the shipping
can
time
be,
takes.
yeah,
Yeah.
within
Or-
a day in some
Yeah,
instances.
usually it's 24 hours, but reason I say we do sometimes build a special press for a customer, and we have a housing and a ram, and you have some pieces and parts that never fail. I mean, most of our presses, honestly, it's we have very little downtime on our presses, but we will usually on a special press like that, we might put an extra ball screw and bearing package on the shelf, but not a complete system. So on a special like that, we can do a repair quickly, but not send a whole unit. If it's a standard, we pretty much can sell. So just to kind of be honest about it and stuff, it really depends on, is it a standard or a special, because we do make some specials.
But
Standard's pretty quick.
as I say, that being said, I mean, I've seen where customers have like driven, or we have put a spare part in one of the vans and just driven it to the customer.
Well, yeah, I mean,
as fast
like
as
we said
possible,
before, I'm sorry.
so.
I'm over talking.
I'm used to it.
Yeah, our presses are used in production environment mainly, so it's critical that they stay running. We understand that here, so we have policies and processes in place to be able to get you up and running super quick. In fact, I would argue that we are the best in the industry at that.
It's
I would-
going back to examples. Pager, get a call from my company. We're in Brighton, Michigan company, in Clarksville, Tennessee has a problem. Drive to Promess. This is on a Saturday. Drive to Promess, put a press in the back of my van, my spare parts, drive to Clarksville, Tennessee. I'm there that night. It ended up not being a bad press. It ended up being something else. It was a tooling issue. And again, that's an old example because I haven't done that in 10 years. But
But similar, we've all done it.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just kind of standard for us.
Yep.
And now we have a guy in Alabama who would have covered that. Back in that day, we didn't have a guy in Alabama. Actually, the guy in Alabama is only 2 hours away from Clarksville, so he would have had that, not me. I wouldn't have had a 9-hour drive. Yeah. So
Can your systems be used over multiple projects?
So yes, they can be. In fact, we have a whole program we put together for repurposing presses and things like that. It goes back to the robustness of the mechanics. We've been talking about this whole time. An example is a customer of ours had a program that ran its course over 10 or 12 years. They had a bunch of presses. It was an assembly line type application, pressing a lot of different components together. That was pretty high demand applications as far as running all the time and things like that. They put them into storage, and then just recently we got a call, this is a recent thing, about repurposing 7 or 8 presses. And we said, sure, let's take a look at them. We sent us some information about them. We kind of looked them over, did a little bit of upgraded some software and things like that, but we're still able to support the controls and everything like that.
I mean,
And
talk
that's
about,
pretty common as well.
and that's return on investment right there. You know, which goes back to, I think, the mainstream, you know, we're asking what's something to consider before buying press fit equipment. And if you take everything that we've talked about, the main message would be long-term thinking. Return on investment, long-term thinking,
Right.
you know.
Yeah, well, I know, like John had said with the, we have repurposed a lot of systems. Normally, the mechanics are so robust and they just last, so you repurpose them.
I would
but
argue they're
sometimes-
too robust sometimes,
Yeah,
as a detriment to not selling new presses.
yeah, sometimes we have had that conversation, to be quite honest. But a lot of times we would recommend upgrading the controls,
Right.
so,
Yeah,
but.
really, that would be the part that gets outdated the most.
Yeah,
would be the
yeah.
controls, right?
So, we want to kind of conclude here, so we really appreciate everybody joining us. I think, you know, one of the things is kind of interesting for us is we wanted to try this kind of impromptu, so I hope it came off pretty well, because we really,
Yeah.
we really wanted to take one of these that it's question and answers. And I think from my side, if I look at it, and Stephanie had just touched on this, short-term versus long-term, you know, the topic, you know, things to consider before buying press fit equipment. From my experience, and I almost call it a pet peeve, that a lot of times people think too short-term. And I think short-term is you know, the long-term considerations is really what you got to think about, because this is capital equipment. You're not buying something that you're gonna have to live with for 6 months and toss it out.
No.
This is equipment that's 5, 10, 20 years. The long term is what matters. And so from my side, that's what I see. I don't know if you guys have any other thoughts on that.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
That's long-term
I think so.
thinking, and we just touched about repurposing equipment. Even that can come into the equation as well. You know,
Yep.
it can be reused. So
Well, and I know that, well, were you gonna say something, Stephanie?
Go ahead.
Okay. Go. John and I have a really bad habit of talking a lot.
we talk over each other all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah. The,
Sorry.
yeah, from Promess's side, we drifted a little bit. I thought some really interesting conversation. I mean, I love this conversation. You know, we have these conversations a lot of times just sitting around our desks. But we drifted sometimes a little bit away from things to consider into more some of the features and stuff. But I think it all applies.
Yep.
And you know, our phone number here is 810-229-9334. Age again, had a hard time with that. 810-229-9334.
Understandably.
Yeah, feel free to give us a call. Website, promessinc.com. And so please come to our website, give us a call. You have any applications? If there was anything, there was some, I think we had about 6 questions we didn't get to. Apologize for that, but we're trying to hold this to under an hour for you guys. But please don't hesitate to call us. We're here to answer questions. And even if you don't have a current Promess question, but you just want to learn a little bit more about the industry, learn a little bit more about monitoring, there's a lot of times where we'll steer people to even, you know, if there's a better solution in the industry. I mean, one of the things we talked about Promess, combining sensing and motion is what we really do. If your application doesn't need sensing and motion, we may be the wrong company for you. And there's a lot of times people come to us with applications, and you know, we'll tell them we'd love to do business with you, but you really need to call company X, Y, or Z, because that's what they do.
Yep.
So don't ever hesitate to call.
Agree.
All right. Thank
Sound
you.
good? Thanks.
Yep. Thank you very much.